Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I am continuing to give you examples from Martha Sweezy's book, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt. You see my bookmark there. In this example, Martha is working with a client named Ian, who presents with some firefighter parts that come out. And you'll see that as a practitioner, it can be kind of intimidating when someone's firefighters come up, right? Because they're often socially unacceptable, they're dangerous, risky, scary, anything from binging, food, alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, to self-harming and suicidal parts, right? We can have culturally conditioned judgmental parts come up, we can have fearful parts come up, but as long as we ask those parts to give us space and we are in self, we will know that the good intentions of those firefighter parts are always there. They're always doing it for a reason. There's always a part in pain or wounded underneath that they're protecting, and we can give the hope of helping that part so that they can naturally relax on their own, because we know that they cannot stop doing what they're doing until what they protect is healed. So this is a fairly short, easy example, believe it or not, of working with a part who gambles and a suicidal part in Martha's client. So she says, Ian is a 50-year-old single, cisgender, Scottish American man with a gambling habit. He had moved from the East Coast to the outskirts of Los Angeles as a young man and had spent much of his life trekking in the wilderness. At first, picking up odd jobs to support his passion, eventually becoming a paid guide. So Ian is meeting with Martha, his head is in his hands, and he says, I drove to Nevada and spent the weekend betting again. Martha says, why now? So you can see the curiosity there, right? There's no judgment, just, interesting, why now? And so Ian says, it's 115 degrees in Oregon. Animals are dying in droves. California's on fire. The Los Angeles sky is an apocalypse orange. Why shouldn't I go and have some fun? The therapist asks, was it fun? Ian says, well, I kept looking for a tree to drive into on the way home, but I didn't want to hurt any trees. Heck, I didn't even want to hurt a concrete overpass. So the therapist, Martha, says, Ian, you have some parts with strong ideas about how to help you when things look this bad in the world. So she's reflecting back. You have these parts that are really trying to help you in these extreme ways when it's difficult in the world. And Ian said, yes. And the therapist says, how do you feel toward the gambling and the suicide parts now? So she's trying to assess for self-energy here. And Ian says, sometimes it's unbearable to be human. So he's really expressing, I think, a part that they're protecting. And the therapist says, what is the most unbearable thing for you? Again, just curiosity about his experience. And Ian says, we are doing this, we're choosing this. Doesn't that blow your mind? How could we possibly be sleepwalking into collective suicide? And so the therapist again reflects back, because as a practitioner, we are just parts detectors, right? She says, the gambling part distracts from your astonishment and sadness. And Ian nods. And she says, can we get permission to help the sad part? Ian says, yes. And she says, where do you notice the sad part? Ian says, in my heart. So fairly quickly, he has told her about these pretty big firefighters, right, that try to escape through gambling and then feel so overwhelmed by the despair and sadness of the exile that they just think death is the best option of escape. And you can see that hierarchy of firefighters, right? The gambling didn't work. So then another part comes in and says, why don't we just die, right? And you can see underneath it, this kind of hopeless despair, this sad part. And so Martha quickly goes in and says, what if we could help that part? Like, how do they feel about that? There's probably been enough trust gained, probably in Martha and in Ian's self, to know that that's possible. So it seems like those protectors give space. Yes, please go to the sad one. And he identifies the sad one in his heart. And so the next step would be to facilitate Ian's self, checking for that self energy, right? Probably, how do you feel toward the sad part? And if he felt overwhelmed by it, we could, negotiate with the sad part to titrate their energy a little bit so that Ian's self could be with them. Or perhaps there were parts that were afraid of it or judgmental of it, and we could work with those until Ian could be in that curious and compassionate and confident space with the sad one, and then have that secure attachment, that beautiful relationship on the inside between Ian's self and the sad one, so that the sad one knew that even when everything seemed doomed in the world, that there was this safe space, this eye of the storm, this secure connection inside that was the best possible escape, that there was no need necessarily, to do the gambling or suicide. And so those parts could relax, because all they're trying to do is really protect against this sad one overwhelming the system. But once they know the sad one is connected to the self, they naturally don't have to do that anymore. It's very much like, I think it was Tony Herbine Blank, maybe Pam Krause, who was talking about how, say there's a young couple and they have a newborn baby, and someone asks them to go out dancing or karaokeing, and they're like, no, we have a baby, like we can't just leave the baby. They're like, oh, just leave the baby for a few hours, they'll be fine, they'll be asleep, just come out. And they're like, no, you don't understand, right? We cannot stop protecting this one until either they get a babysitter, right? So there's someone else that they know is caring for that one. Then they can naturally go out dancing, right? Or the baby grows up and is self-sufficient and is updated in some kind of way, right? Then they could go out. So it's the same thing with firefighters or protectors of any kind. They can't stop protecting until that tender one, that wounded one, that vulnerable one is in secure attachment with self. Then they feel free. I can finally breathe. Because often these, the gambling part, the suicide part, they're young. They're typically teenage or younger, right? So they've been doing this job for a long time and are very tired, and now they can be free. So Martha says, my job is to help him, Ian, connect with and comfort his sad part so that his firefighters don't take over and bankrupt or kill him, right? It's to recognize the good intention of those parts, but also to recognize that what they want to happen, they cannot make happen. And so only the self can do that. And we can offer them that hope. What if you made room for the self to come in and be with the sad one? Then you could be free. So I hope you appreciate that example. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I always got to try to find the stop recording button.